Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another Intentional Guy on air today with Stephen Arms. Stephen is an author, but also has a lot of great uh, information on fatherhood and raising our boys. Something we haven't really done on this show yet. And so I'm really excited uh, to hear about it and to have a great conversation with you, Stephen, about a much needed topic. So, you guys out there who are fathers, I really hope you'll pay attention to this episode, listen to our conversation that we're having today, and see if this is something that can touch you and your son's life and enhance it. I know my son's 18 now, Stephen, and I know that through his teen years, we struggled a lot, and I
hmm
wish I would have had some of the guidelines, some of the things in place. They don't come with a good manual for us in raising them. And we conquered a lot of issues had I think we've been a little bit more proactive, would have saved him a lot of issues and us a lot of issues as well, but also geared him better towards his, now that he's 18, being a man. But
Yeah,
Stephen, I really want you to just go ahead, and I'm going to have you just start, maybe share your story. Just tell us, whatever God's laying on your heart to bring to our audience about this subject today.
sure, absolutely. So, what I write about in the book is something called a rite of passage. And a rite of passage is an event that a boy can look back on in his life and say, that was the moment that I became a man. When we look at other cultures throughout the world, we see there are examples of these coming of age ceremonies, these rites of passages for boys and girls as they enter into adulthood. The most well known or most famous is probably the Jewish bar mitzvah.
Mhm.
Another example would be the walkabout in Aboriginal Australia society. And that's where a boy is sent off into the wilderness for 3 to 6 months at a time. And when he comes back, he's no longer considered to be a boy, but he's considered to be a man and he's eligible for marriage. And modern Western society doesn't really have an equivalent coming of age event. And I think that that's one reason that boys feel the need to kind of prove themselves as men because no one's ever told them that they're a man. So they're trying to prove it to themselves. And what that might look like, what the culture offers our boys as a rite of passage is the sexual conquest of women,
Yeah.
pornography, video game addictions, right? In a lot of video games, you can literally slay a dragon or kill a terrorist. That's totally feeds into that masculine ego, proving yourself as a warrior and as a man. Other examples would be joining a gang or violence, imposing your will physically over another man to show that you're a better man than him. All of these are examples of boys essentially trying to prove their manhood to themselves. But what we write about in the book is that if a father simply takes the initiative and bestows the title of man on his son and says, son, I want you to know that in my eyes, I consider you to be a man now. If a father bestows the title of man on his son, then the boy doesn't feel the need to prove it to himself or prove it to his peers.
Mhm.
And the way that we suggest going about doing that is through one of these rite of passage weekends. My father actually organized a rite of passage for me when I was 13 years old. I'm 31 now. He actually organized them for all of my brothers. So I am one of four boys. I'm the second born. So my older brother got a rite of passage when he turned 13. I got one, and then my younger brothers and actually my cousins got them as well. So the whole kind of extended family got these weekends.
Wow. What did these weekends consist of? What did it look like?
So the weekends, for one, they didn't just involve my dad, but they involved my grandfather was there and two of my uncles. So for me,
Mm.
I had these kind of four male role models to look up to. And the thinking behind that is like, a dad is the most important male role model in a boy's life. The role of a dad is irreplaceable. But around the age of 13, there's also this tension between father and son, right? The boy
Right.
is becoming a teenager. He wants to spread his wings a little bit. And so the thinking is that if you bring in other men who the boy has a relationship with, but he's not so close to them, that their advice might help to sink in with the boy. It could be the same exact thing that dad has been saying for 3 months, but just hearing it come out of the mouth of a man who's not dad, the boy might actually get it.
Right.
So the thinking was dad definitely needs to be there. He's the leader of this, but let's get other men involved too to help initiate this boy into manhood. The weekend itself was made up of so 7 different rituals, and these are kind of like different steps along the weekend. It was a very organized event. So just like a graduation ceremony or bar mitzvah has an entrance ceremony, this weekend had an entrance ceremony as well. And it involved reading from scripture and also the lighting of a fire. And that fire for us represented God, it represented the Holy Spirit. The Bible passage that we read was from Exodus, where Moses encounters God in the form of a burning bush. So when we lit the fire in the entrance ceremony, we kept that fire lit throughout the whole weekend. And that represented God's presence in our lives in that weekend, but also in our lives throughout our entire life. So it was kind of a physical way to show the boy the importance of keeping that flame of faith alive in his life.
Mm. Wow. I like the concept too of other men being involved. It goes with that thing, it takes a village to raise a child, but also um, introducing good role models to someone, and giving, but also allowing that. I imagine during that time, it's also of a bonding type time as well. So this young guy knows that um, these men are for me, and so I have more than just my father, but I have these other men in my life that are supporting me, raising me up as well.
Yeah, that was definitely a huge aspect of it. For me, when I look back at what was most impactful about the weekend, one of the big things was definitely the relationships that I was able to build with my grandfather and with my uncles and with my dad. I think it's because of that weekend, and they opened up to me and shared things about their own stories as men, their own faith journeys, because they kind of opened up first. I later in my life was able to go back to them and seek their counsel. I really feel like those guys, I can talk to them about anything.
Right.
There's no walls with those guys. And I think it really goes back to this weekend and their willingness to open up to me, to share with me about what it means to be a man, really helped to develop those relationships.
During that time, so I want to ask you a couple questions. During that time, do you remember if there were some like eye-opening moments for you, or some aha moments, some information that maybe you didn't have before that time period, but there uh, gave you as a young man some insight that you may not have had before that impacted you?
Yeah, there were a lot of aha moments. I would say the whole weekend was kind of full of them. One of them was the stories that they were telling me. They were talking to me about what it means to be a man, and uh, in that conversation, they would try to tie it into personal stories, whether that was from work. So my grandfather was a police officer in San Francisco for almost 20 years. And so hearing stories from him about his time in the police department, that was totally mind opening to me. That blew my mind hearing these stories about how when he was a young man and had 4 kids of his own and going to work and people pulling knives on him and people, pulling guns out on him, like, and how much how difficult that was, how much of a struggle that was for him as a man. You know, I never knew that about my grandfather. Same thing about my uncles. You know, they shared to me about their marriages and, you know, all the great things in their lives, but also some of their own personal struggles. And I had just never, you know, I think when you're a kid, you see these guys as kind of like the perfect image of what it means to be a man. You
Right.
don't really see their faults as a kid. But because of this weekend and the discussions that we were engaged in, they really opened up to me about some of their um, some of their warts, you know. And I think that, like I said earlier, allowed me to later in my life go to them and seek their counsel because I knew I didn't have to put up this false front with them. I knew that I could talk to them about the good things in life, but also the bad things in life.
And that's really good too, because, you know, as a child, one of the things we do with our children is we protect them. They don't need to know all the ugliness of the world, right? So,
Yeah.
so we protect them. But I like this aspect that we hit this stage now where you're becoming a man, and here are some things that you need to know. And we need to be. I want to be the one that shares those with my child and have that protected because there's so many different perspectives of what it means to be a man. I mean,
Yes.
and crazy stuff. And you know, if we let our kids just find that out, what it means to be a man from the video games, from YouTube, and all this other stuff that they're social media that they're watching and these celebrities, then they're going to get this. That's where they're going to get their idea of what a man is. But I love the fact that I want my son to know what I feel a man is. And I like the fact that, you know, like your grandfather sharing some of those stories that you never probably knew before because you didn't need to know them up to this point.
Yeah.
But now that you're crossing into this new stage in your life, you know, here is information now. And it's like a paradigm shift is taking place during this for you because
Yes.
now you're getting more facts and more information uh, that is now changing your whole opinion and view of life, what's out there, and how do you handle those things? What is expected of your behavior when these traumatic moments happen to you? So,
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, you know, that was essentially stage two of this rite of passage was what it means to be a man discussion. You know, as you talked about, the whole purpose of it was for the men in his life to tell him what it means to be a man instead of him getting it from the culture. And it was, I would say, the first time that they kind of talked to me like a man. You know, before that, as you said, they kind of protected me. I lived in a bubble, you know, but that was kind of their first time where they showed me that, you know, the world isn't perfect and there's, you're going to have struggles as a man, you know. So that was really the first kind of sharing exercise of the rite of passage weekend. And then after that, my dad would gave a gift to the boy. My dad gave a gift to me. And really, just like these words are kind of like this gift of what it means to be a man, verbally, he also gave me a physical gift. And in my case, it was a gold coin that his dad had given him. I never knew my dad's dad, my grandfather on that side. Um, and so this was a gift that his dad had given him and obviously had sentimental value to him. And so
mm,
just like these words were a gift from one man to another, and he also gave me this physical gift saying, I can trust you with this item that has this family heirloom, this item that has
mm.
value to our family, you know? So that was kind of the way to tie in the verbal advice into something physical was we followed up that discussion with the physical giving of a gift.
Wow. And let me ask you, how did they present the spiritual side of this to you? Because I know a lot of youth will receive that differently, and they see it differently. So was it a spiritual eye-waking moment for you? And how was that presented?
So another element of the weekend was a scripture sharing exercise, and every man came prepared with one of his favorite passages from scripture. And he would read that passage to the group and then give a reflection on how he'd applied it to his life or how he understood it. And that was really the exercise that was meant to pass down the faith from one generation to the next. And, my grandfather was kind of famous in our family for sharing the story of the prodigal son and breaking down how sometimes in our lives we find ourselves in the position of the prodigal son. Sometimes we find ourselves in the position of the older son. And sometimes we find ourselves in the position of the father, and what is the appropriate responses to take in our lives whenever we find ourselves in those positions. Um, I would say, so for me, that there was definitely an element of faith in the weekend. Absolutely. That was central to the weekend. Um, I think that what was most important in that, though, was that I knew that all of these guys, my dad, my grandfather, my two uncles, were doing their best to live it out in their real life too. Like I knew that about them going into the weekend. It wasn't a shock to me that they're like, oh yeah, we're
Right.
practicing Christians.
Right.
So I think any advice that you give to the boy, whether it's about being a man or whether it's about faith or anything in between, it has to be backed up by your actions, right? If you're not
Yeah.
practicing what you preach, it means nothing to the boy. But in
Right.
my case, for my rite of passage weekend, it was totally everything they were saying was also backed up by their actions. And I think that for me, that made me take it seriously.
And that's great. That, I think us as fathers, a lot of times I don't know the right word to say, but we underestimate our role as a father, and what it means to that child. Because a lot of times as teenagers, we're getting to the side where we know they don't want to listen to us. They know everything. And sometimes it gets discouraging, and sometimes what happens, a lot of people just give up.
Yeah,
And we can't give up as fathers. We can't, because that teenage boy, is his whole manhood is dependent upon what we do. And I know that it's so important for my son how he sees me treat his mother, because in reality, how I treat his mother is how he's going to treat his future wife,
absolutely.
because he's going to model that. And also how I'm going to raise him is how he's going to raise his children in their future life. And so I think as dads, we underestimate the power that God has put in our life, or the responsibility God has put in our life. Because even though it seems like they're not watching, they are watching. Even though we think they're not listening, they are listening. That's why I love what you said. It's so important that we live what we're saying, because if it's what we live that's really important, because that's going to shine brighter than words, and that's what they're going to follow more than words. Would you say?
Absolutely. 100%. I agree with you totally that, uh, actions speak louder than words. But I will also say that as fathers, a lot of times it's difficult for us to have conversations with our sons. It's hard for us
Yes.
to verbally use our words. And that is so important too. I don't mean to say that it's more important than your actions, but you do, as a dad, have to use your words to build up your son. And
Yes.
you have to say I love you a lot, not just once but a lot.
Yes.
Another big one
Yeah.
is I'm proud of you. I want you
Yep.
to know, son, I'm proud of you. And I think really what this rite of passage weekend boils down to, the culmination of the weekend, in fact, the very last step of it, is the bestowing of title of man. So you tell your son, in my eyes, you are no longer a boy, but I see you as a man now. And what we argue in the book is that has significant positive impact on the boy as he goes through his teenage years.
I couldn't imagine if my dad would have looked at me and said, "Today, son, you're a man." How that would have puffed me up, how that would have encouraged me. And I love my dad.
Yeah.
But my dad didn't say it. He wasn't someone who said, "I love you" a lot. He wasn't, because he didn't have that modeled for him. So we model what we know to model. But we can change what we know to model. And I knew that was something I wanted to change in my life as well. So I love that what you're saying there, because we don't want to speak. What we speak over our child is what impacts them.
Yes.
And if we are speaking, you're ignorant, don't be stupid, this and that to them, then that's what we're telling them, that they're ignorant and they're stupid. But if we will speak over the positive things in them, like Christ does with us, that's going to be more empowering to them. And I can't imagine as a young man when your dad looks at you and says, "Today, son, I see you as a man," how that energizes, and what a life-changing moment that is, to have the most important man in your life look at you and tell you, "Today, son, I don't see you as a little boy, but I see you as a man."
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was powerful. I will say, as a 13-year-old boy, because I did have this weekend, I did have that experience. I didn't know what a gift it was until later in my life. I know this sounds crazy, but because everyone in my family got these weekends, I kind of thought this was just normal. Like everyone got something like this
Right.
rite of passage weekend. It really wasn't until my early 20s when I I had this friend actually who uh, he was getting married and he asked me to be the best man at his wedding. And one time we were hanging out at his house, and he had a lot on his mind, thinking about becoming a father, becoming potentially becoming a father soon, becoming a husband. Um, he had a lot on his mind, and he asked me, he's like, "Steve, when was the first time that you ever considered yourself to be a man?" And I was like,
Mm.
"Well, let me tell you a story. When I turned 13, I had this weekend, and my dad, my grandfather, my uncles pretty much told me that I was a man. And ever since then, I never really questioned it." And he was just like, "Wow, like here I am getting married, and I'm not even sure like when my manhood began." And I just looked at him and I was like, "Dude, are you kidding me? Like, you're marrying an awesome woman, you have a great job, you have a good relationship with your parents. You're a better man than me, dude." Um, but it was that moment in my early 20s in that conversation with him that I realized, wow, most guys don't have something like this. And a lot of guys actually question their manhood because their fathers never gave them this rite of passage weekend. And that's when I started to like the wheel started to turn in my mind. I was like, wow, that was a really cool thing that they did. And then ultimately, it led us to writing this book with my dad so that other families could kind of take on this rite of passage tradition and implement it in their own families, like our family has.
That's so awesome. And that, towards the end of this, I really want to discuss your book a little bit so that my listeners, uh, can order that and look at that, uh, and use that as a tool. I'm so big on tools that we can use to help us be more intentional in our life. I have a couple more questions for you though, because I know as a father, you said this earlier. There's things that are uncomfortable sharing with our kids,
Yeah.
and I remember. Let's talk about the sex talk.
Yeah.
The sex talk. My dad did not want to talk about it. My mom sat him down, and she's like, "You need to go talk to the boys." And I remember afterwards, my mom said, "So did it go good?" I was like, "Yeah, I don't know what the big deal is, Mom." I'm like, "I knew that stuff a long time ago." And my mom's mortified. She's like, but she knows my dad, and she said, "Wait just a minute. What did your dad tell you?" And I said, "Well, he said that the birds go chirp, chirp, and the bees go buzz, buzz, the birds will poop on you and the bees will sting you. And that was my birds and bees talk with my dad, because my dad was so uncomfortable with having that conversation. We didn't have it. But the truth is, the world's going to have that conversation with us.
Yeah.
What happened in my situation was I was sexually abused by someone. And I've, not to put blame anywhere at all, because that's not what this is about, but how vital that talk could have been for me. And it took me until later on in my life to deal with that. So what a lot of dads don't understand, the world's going to have this conversation with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, and it is an uncomfortable conversation, to say the least. It's embarrassing. There's all these things that the enemy will throw into us. But to me, I think it can be an empowering moment. It can be such a God honoring moment, because this is something you get to input and tell them. How did that conversation go?
Yeah. So my dad gave me the birds and the bees talk a few years earlier. I think for me, well, the real birds and the bees talk, not the one that your dad gave you. My dad gave me the real version when I was around 10 years old, I want to say, give or take a year or two. So I already knew about sex. And I was a little bit uncomfortable about this 13-year-old weekend, because I thought, oh, is this going to be a repeat of the birds and the bees
Of
talk?
that.
But and sex did come up in this rite of passage weekend, and actually, what was really beneficial, helpful for me, was, so my maternal grandfather was there, and then my dad was there, and his brother-in-laws were there. My maternal grandfather had all daughters, so these were the men who were married to his girls, and hearing them talk about sex and how, as a man, we have to not only protect the dignity of women at all times, but to protect our own dignity. And hearing them talk about how sex is a good thing within the construct of a marriage, and how it can be how it's meant to be a bonding activity between a man and a wife in a marriage. For me, it was like, I was still uncomfortable with that because I was a preteen. This whole concept of sex was kind of awkward for me. But seeing my dad, my uncles talk about sex in a normal, healthy way in front of their father-in-law, and my father-in-law wasn't uncomfortable about it. He was like, "No, you guys are all married. You are like, this is good. This is healthy." And I think for me as a 12-year-old boy, seeing that dynamic play out in front of my own eyes, seeing those conversations, how in that context, sex doesn't have to be this uncomfortable thing. In fact, it can be, it's quite normal. That for me was super beneficial. And that for me, as I went through my teenage years and my 20s, I was like, that's what I want. I want a marriage, a lifelong marriage. I want to save myself for my wife, so that on our wedding night, like, we're both giving each other fully to each other. And I think seeing it in those guys, seeing what they had, was a major reason why they painted the picture for me. They showed it to me on a roadmap. They said, this is the life that we're living, and we're inviting you to live this life too.
Yeah. And I envy that so much, because that's a conversation I would have loved to have. But I think what we get hooked up on a lot of times is we get into, when we're talking about sex with our young boys, is that we're talking about the actual act of sex. But in reality, what we're really talking to them is about true intimacy, and how to be intimate with one person, with your wife, and how to value her, and how spectacular that moment is when you're intimate with someone. And intimacy is not about sex, and that to me is one of the things I think we get hooked up on, is the actual act itself of sex, instead of the importance of the the intimacy that we're having with that person and how special that person is to us and how to cherish that woman who has given herself to us and we have given to her, and how important that is. And that was, I think, what I was missing as a child growing up, was understanding the intimacy part of it. Because like I said, we get so caught up on the actual act of sex, and that's not, I don't need my dad to tell me how to have sex. I need him to tell me the importance of intimacy with them. And then that relays that's how he's treating my mom. That's what it is. And that's how special. That's why my mom feels so special with my dad, is because of the intimacy that they have with one another. So I just see that the importance, and I think we miss that as dads a lot with it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you 100%. There was an element of talking about sex and marriage in this rite of passage weekend. I wouldn't say it's the focus of it. It's maybe 5% of the whole thing. It's really, this weekend is meant to initiate a boy into manhood. And one element of that is marriage and sex, but there were a lot of other discussions that took place that weekend as well.
Well, and then you have to have the conversations of direction as a man. Where are you going and how to move forward? Because now that we're telling you you're a man, I imagine was there a time where they helped you build that roadmap to success in this? And what do you do now that we're calling you a man? What does that mean? What do you do next? Is that included in that?
So here's a really cool thing about the weekend is the boy during the weekend is giving leadership responsibilities. So he is the one to decide who cooks for each meal, who cleans for each meal. He actually picks out where each man sleeps, which bedroom each man gets. He even picks out which man sits in each position in the car, who gets shotgun seat, who gets the back seat, who gets the third row on the way back. So here's this 13-year-old boy giving leadership responsibilities and making decisions for these grown men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, So a part of the weekend was helping the boy get that experience of how to make decisions and that not only impact him, but impact other people as well. And, those are, in the grand scheme of things, those are really small decisions to make. But the more experience he can get with that, the more that will help him when he has to make the bigger decisions in life, like what to study in school, what job to take, who to marry. The more experience he can get making the small decisions, the easier those big decisions are going to be later in his life.
Well, and practical applications are so important for us. So as a young kid making that decision over these grown men, it's got to be a little intimidating to do. But in doing that, they're teaching you're teaching something. There's a lesson that they can learn, and it takes away, I think, probably helps take away a lot of unresolved fear that you have with leadership. And if these grown men trust you, that are so important in your life with some of these decisions, how empowering that has to be at that moment for that young child. And especially as they're treating him like a man. I mean, that's kind of the neat thing. It's not just saying, hey, calling you a man, we're treating you with that respect as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So there were small ways like that where the whole weekend is meant to build a boy up, build up his confidence in his masculine identity. Yeah, absolutely. There were conversations during the weekend talking about work, the relationship between time and money and following your passion compared to following something that might be more practical and provide for your family. There were definitely those conversations and how to strike balance in that as a man. There were conversations about where are you going on your faith journey? You know, are you getting closer to God, or are you getting further away from him? I think as Christians, we believe that our ultimate destination is to be with God forever, to be with God forever in heaven. And ultimately, you know, any other decision that we make in life is secondary to that. That's the biggest goal in life. But yeah, so those kind of direction conversations were a big part of the weekend. You know, whether that was your work life, your family life, or your faith life. Those were a big part of the weekend.
Well, what other applications, what other things were included in that? And how, let me ask you this, how long was the weekend? When did it start? When did it end?
The weekend started on Saturday morning, and actually it was a surprise for the boy. So my dad told me we were going to go away, just me and him, for a weekend. And then on the drive up to this supposed camping trip we were going to take, we stopped at a breakfast diner, and in the booth next to us was my grandfather and two uncles. So I had no idea that this weekend was coming. Um, it started Saturday morning, and then it finished on Sunday evening. We came home, and actually, there was a just a regular birthday party for me on Sunday night. You know, with my siblings, all the women of the family were there too. My grandmother, my aunts. So the weekend kind of the end of the weekend is just kind of a regular birthday party for this boy, kind of a celebration, you know, just like in these other examples of a rite of passage, the bar mitzvah, the walkabout. The boy comes
Right.
back from this weekend into the family, no longer a boy, but a man now.
Wow, that's so cool. I mean, I like that. I like that whole aspect of it with it. So what were some of the other things, if you don't mind me asking, what was there any other applications that you felt were important during that time period?
You know, going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think that one of the biggest parts of the weekend was the bonds that you form with these men in your life. One thing that gets said throughout the weekend quite a bit is, I want you to know that I love you unconditionally, and you can come talk to me about anything. I have your best interest at heart. And if you're ever going through a rough time in life or asking questions, please come to us. We are a tribe of men here to support you. You know, please lean on us when you're going through those times. And it wasn't until I got to college, you know, I got to college and I started meeting people who were raised differently than me and had different beliefs than me. And that really made me question the way that I was raised and my own personal beliefs, you know. And to be frank, you know, I went through a period where I didn't know if I believed in God or wanted to practice my faith
Right.
anymore. And I remembered that rite of passage weekend when I was 13 years old, and how my dad and my grandfather had told me, you know, if you're ever going through questions or going through a rough time in life, please come to us for advice. And I was nervous to talk to my parents about this, you know, like, are they going to be disappointed if I tell them I
Right.
don't know if I believe in God anymore? But it was that weekend and those words that they told me that gave me the confidence and the trust to go back to them and say, Dad, Grandpa, I'm really struggling here. I have a lot of questions. Can you help me? You know, and they were at that time, when I opened up to them and told them, like, I'm really struggling with this. I'm not sure that I believe in God. Why do you believe in God? You know, it was like I was finally like interested. You know, like I was entering
Mhm.
this new stage in life where I was out on my own in college again, in college, and um, like my eyes were like just so much more opened to my receiving that advice from those guys. Uh, they weren't able to answer all of my questions, but they were able to answer quite a few of them. And you know, hindsight is 2020, but I don't know if it wasn't for this weekend. I don't know if I would be a practicing Christian. So
Right.
yeah, those relationships that I built with those guys and the ability to talk to them about anything was a huge part of the weekend.
Well, it had to be such a powerful thing because you've written a book about it. And so I know that when we write a book and we take the time out of that's because we find the importance of that event in our life. So I know that it was an important time, and how great that you were able to write this with your father. So I would love for you to take a few minutes, talk to us about the book. Tell us about the book. Uh, Tell us where can we get the book. I'll make sure we have a link for that, and just whatever you would like to say about that book.
Sure. So the book is called Milestone to Manhood, a Christian rite of passage to help your 13-year-old son make the leap from boyhood to manhood. And the book, the first part of the book kind of tells our family story and how this tradition got started and how it impacted my life. And then the whole second part of the book is really a how to guide for fathers for them to implement this tradition in their own lives for their own sons. So it's part memoir, part how to guide. Uh, your listeners can find a copy on our website, which is milestonetomanhood.com, or it's also available for purchase on Amazon as well.
Okay, great. And I got another question to ask you as we close out a little bit on this. Uh, this this impact that this rite of passage had, did your brothers have they had the same impact from it as you have had from it?
I would say yes, each to different degrees. I think the weekend means different things to different people. Um, I would say that all of them look back on it with a positive experience. They all see the value in it, and they all want to do the weekend for their sons. If they have them. We're still relatively young. Not all of my brothers have
Right.
kids yet, but we all look back on it with positive experience. I mean, I was the one that wrote a book about it, so I think it might mean the most to me right now. But like I said, as a teenager, I didn't know what a gift this was. And so I think this is one of those things that it's a seed that it's a long-term investment.
Hmm.
Definitely there are short-term benefits to it as well. Your 13-year-old son holds his head up a little bit higher, knowing that his dad considers him to be a man. But the real long-term the real benefits of the weekend are long-term.
Yeah. And what a great opportunity it is for us as fathers when we have that moment where it's dedicated just to that child, that we can have those conversations supported and backed by the other men of our tribe with us. But then how important to that kid to see how important he is, that these men would take out this time. And even though at that age they may not understand the full benefit of it yet, which is okay. It's like you said, it's planting that seed that now is going to grow, because now you're more cognizant of these men in your life. So now all these things that they said to you, you self-consciously, subconsciously, you're watching to see if they really meant what they said, and how that builds a character in us for the rest of our life as we're growing, because now we were kind of given a jump start to manhood and the importance of what it means to be a man. And what a great gift that your father gave to you and your brothers by doing that and by caring enough to do that. Because I think a lot of us stop shy because we don't feel adequate or equipped to do this. And the truth is, you are adequate and equipped for the simple fact that you're their father, and
Yeah.
you have the most impact on that kid's life, whether you believe it or not. You do. And that child is always going to look at their father for that example, whether it's a good or bad example, the rest of their life. And to my listeners who's listening, you may feel like you're just inadequate, or you've made a lot of mistakes, and it doesn't matter about your past. It matters about right now. We can take our past and show our young men yes, I made these mistakes, and this is the lessons I learned from these mistakes. And I hope you will learn from what mistakes I've made so that you can be a better father and better husband for your family. And what a great way to teach our sons grace and forgiveness as well. So if you think you have to be perfect to do this, don't let that lie get in your head. You don't have to be perfect to do that. And you are adequate. God equips us. And here's a great tool, a great resource, your book that we can reach out, grab, and use it as a guideline to help emulate that same thing with it. So, in closing, is there anything else, Stephen, that you would like to share with us in closing?
In closing, I would just kind of mimic what you're saying. If you're a father listening to this, having hesitation, I would say, you're not doing this for yourself. You're doing this for your son. It's a very unselfish reason. Um, and then the other thing is that I would say that, every father has the responsibility to tell his son at the appropriate age, son, I want you to know that in my eyes, I consider you to be a man now. And that if every father in this country did that, that this country and this world would be a much better place because boys wouldn't feel the need to prove their manhood through dangerous or reckless stunts. So that's really kind of the core message of what I'm saying.
And how powerful a message that is for a young man to hear from their father. And our premise on this show is how to be more intentional every day. And what a great way to be intentional in raising your young man to become that man that God is wanting him to be. And what a great opportunity that you can present to them and just being in using some intentionality with this. So I'm going to encourage you guys, go into the link here, purchase this book, look at this time to move forward even with your own sons in this. And until next time, guys, Stephen, thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Very interested in your book. And so thank you for being here. And to my listener, until next time, just keep being intentional. You guys have a great week.